Got to kind of fold this under. Big neck. We're live. It is 2:16-ish. I think we're going to get rid of that. I'm back. Took a trip, vacation, actually down to the happiest place on earth. Went down to Disneyland, which was very cool. I don't recommend driving near Thanksgiving. It's not good. But the trip to Disneyland was awesome. So I got to go on a lot of things that I hadn't been there because I haven't been there in a really, really long time. So a lot of things have changed since I was down there. And then my son, who was very young the last time he went there, this was all new for him. So this was cool. And he got to be there with a bunch of his friends. And so it was really, really super cool. Tonight we want to talk, or today we want to talk about, because it's 2:15, we want to talk about the 4.8 liter. Because I think one of the things that happens with people when we're looking at 4.8s, they're like, okay, junkyard 4.8, that encompasses everything. It encompasses everything that they get from the junkyard. 4.8 is the same as a 5.3, it's the same as a 6.0. If you're lucky enough to find a 6.2 or something, you're not going to find a 7 liter, but you're probably not going to find a 6.2 in there either. But all of those are the same, essentially. And so anything that we would do, that you might pick the same camshaft for all of them, you can, but you're going to get different results when you pick a cam and put the same cam in a 4.8, and then take that same cam, put it in a 6 liter. The results are definitely going to be different. Same thing with intake manifolds, same thing with cylinder heads and stuff. So what I wanted to do is go over some stuff for the 4.8 guys, because the 4.8 is kind of its own little thing. And this is true of a lot of different, if you take a 265-inch small block versus a 350 or a 400, which are 400s are, I think, much more rare. I don't think nearly as many people work on small block Chevys work with 400s as they do 350s. And then obviously I don't think a lot of people work with 265s either. But all of your other ones too, 302s, 307s, 327s, any 283, I guess you could, I just don't know. A lot of guys are building those kinds of things unless they're doing it for a restoration kind of project. But 318, 360 Mopars, just anything, anytime you have a bigger and smaller version of the same kind of motor, 302, 351 Windsor, same kind of deal. You actually don't want to put, well, you can, but like I said, if you put the same camshaft in them, the effective RPM range of the bigger motor is going to be different than it is of the smaller motor. And this is certainly the case on the 408. So when I recommend stuff for the guys in the 408s, and this is where it gets really, really specific on these guys. The 408, what they want to know is, sometimes guys are still locked into this. Oh, I got to, if we're talking about stock heads on let's pick a 4.8 and a 5.3, because they're gonna require different cylinder heads than a 6 liter. On a 6 liter, your choices are all of the heads basically, because then on a 6 liter you can go to the rec port heads. You can't do that on a 4.8 and 5.3. You can't choose 821 or 823. You can't choose any of the factory rec port heads. On the 6 liter you can, and if I were looking for power, I wanted to make 500 horsepower with my 6 liter or 550 or if you wanted to do 600, then I might pick something different than that. But if you wanted to make a lot of power, put a big camshaft in it, and you're kind of doing an all motor deal on a 6 liter, the ones that would make the most peak power anyway, and the most power from, I don't know, let's say 4,000 on up on a cam 6 liter would be the factory rec port heads. They flow a lot more than any of the cathedral port heads. And they'll make more power, particularly if you then mill them and bring the chamber size down, because they do have a bigger chamber than all of the cathedral port heads except for the 317 heads. But on the 4.8, you're limited in your cylinder head choice. You can't put the rec port heads on it, but you can put all the other cathedral port heads on. And because GM put 799 heads on some of the Gen 4 stuff on the 4.8s, people are thinking, oh yeah, that's the way to go. It's not. On a 5.3, you might be tempted to do that. I honestly wouldn't if I was putting together a 5.3. And again, it depends on what I was putting it together for. If I'm putting together a turbo junkyard motor, I just run whatever's on there. And I just put a cam and springs and put the right size injectors on, and then decide on my turbo based on the power output they want to achieve. I size the turbo accordingly, and then go on from there. And don't worry about, oh, you know, 799 243 head flows a little more than the 706 862 head. Am I worried about that little bit more flow? Because then I'm going to trade power down low. On a 4.8 and 5.3, I don't choose a 243 or a 799 head, and I don't recommend it for people. There's no reason to go with that cylinder head unless you were trying to do, you know, a maximum effort kind of all motor 4.8 or 5.3, but then you'd have a ported head or an aftermarket head, like something that would be way better than that. Something like an airflow research or I was going to say a trick flow 205 head, but something like that, something that's designed for specifically for that small bore, because that's one of the problems with the 4.8, even more so than a 5.3. When I did the testing on the 5.3, when we ran all the factory cathedral port heads, the 706 862 heads did the best. They were better than the 799 heads, and all the guys are in 243 heads, and all the guys are jumping up and down. Well, you need to equalize the compression. No, we just need to equalize we needed to make them all stock, and that's what we did. And stock for stock, that head, the 799 and 243 head, even though it flows more, it has lower compression, but it also has bigger valves and bigger. It has a bigger chamber, but bigger valves and bigger port volume. It doesn't seem to work as well on these smaller motors. And again, we're still picking nits here. So if it's 10 horsepower or whatever difference between them, do you really recognize that? A guy at a track probably would want that because it's 10 like on average. And on the 4.8, it would be even worse. It would be skewed even worse in favor of the smaller head because you're having to support less power. You don't need the extra airflow. But the small chamber, the small valve, and the smaller port are going to be much better. The 4.8 is going to be much better served by that cylinder head. So on a 4.8, I definitely recommend, if a guy is going to use a stock head, I would definitely recommend an 862 or a 706 head. Same thing with intake manifolds. We're talking about intake manifolds, and this is really why I brought all of this up, because I got a lot of questions from people on carbureted stuff. So carburetors work fine. The EFI guys, you can settle down. Oh, carburetors are junk. They're not. They work really good. One of the downsides of carburation on an LS, particularly on a cathedral port, less so on the rec port stuff, because I think that they did a better job on those manifolds, because I think that they came out later, like the stuff from Edelbrock. But there's this question on the cathedral port stuff of single plane versus dual plane. Now, either one of those carbureted intake manifolds, if I have my choice, I would pick a Truck or a Trailblazer SS EFI manifold, not because it's EFI, but because the manifold design itself makes better average power production and it makes more peak power. It's just a better intake manifold, regardless of whether it's port injected or not. But if we are picking carbureted cathedral port manifolds on a 4.8, I 100%, in all cases, recommend the dual plane intake manifold, because there's almost no sort of power level and even realistic RPM level where the RPM style, dual plane intake manifold isn't going to satisfy 99% of the people that would be asking about that. And if you want more RPM out of your RPM or RPM air gap style intake manifold, your dual plane intake manifold, because other people make those as well, then you just put a spacer on it. But I've tested single plane, your Victor Jr. style or your Holly. There's a number of them out there. I've tested those on 4.8s, and in the vehicle driving around like a streetcar, they're just terrible. You have to have a lot of stall converter to make that thing like a worthwhile deal, and it's just not. And even on a boosted thing. If you run a boosted thing, a blow through like a VORTECH deal, you've got a VORTECH on there and you've got some sort of cam, a BTR, Truck Norris, or a hot rod, or, I don't know that I put these bigger cams. We'll talk about that in a minute on the 4.8, but you have some sort of smaller camshaft in there on the 4.8, and you have a single plane intake manifold. You're blowing through it with a turbo or a VORTECH or something, or a Torque Storm ProCharge or whatever. You don't have to have a single plane. The dual plane is still going to do what the dual plane does. It's going to have a lot more power up to the power peak. And so that's just better in every circumstance. So on the 4.8, we're looking at, the smaller cylinder heads. We're looking at milder camshafts. I don't pick big camshafts for the 4.8s because even like when we did the testing on the 4.8 where we ran the 224 cam, especially if it's got ported heads and like a fast intake manifold, you're talking about a 7,000 RPM plus horsepower peak, let alone where you're going to rev it to. So you have to have obviously the valve springs and rockers and the cam stability and stuff for all that to make that work. And it's not because a lot of guys, oh yeah, that 4.8s love to rev. No, they did. That's where they're going to make power because they're smaller. That just happens on every smaller motor. It doesn't matter about the stroke length, the bore size. None of that matters. If it's smaller, if you have a 4-liter motor and a 5-liter motor, the 4-liter motor, regardless of what the bore and stroke is, it's going to make power, at a higher engine speed, unless you put a really, really tiny camshaft in it, a long runner intake manifold. That if they're equipped the same, it's going to make power at a higher engine speed. We see that even stock. A 4.8 makes power at a peak power at a higher engine speed, even though it has the same heads, cam, and intake manifold, same compression, all that stuff. It makes power at a higher engine speed. And since we're only talking about, 5,200 versus 5,600 or whatever, this is not high RPM stuff. This is not stroke length related. It's just displacement related. One of them is smaller than the other one. So we pick these smaller things for the 4.8s. Yeah, you can pick a giant camshaft in there, and yeah, you can pick a tunnel ram or a high ram or whatever, and you can make it at 8 or 9,000, whatever you think that you're comfortable with. You can make it that kind of motor if that's what you want. But in almost every scenario, you can also do that with a 5.3 or a 6.0. And while you're doing that, as you're revving this thing up to 7, 8, 9,000, wherever you think you're going to rev it to and wherever you science the thing out, because it's going to take a lot of valve train stability to make that happen. The stroke length isn't even going to come into play there. It's all going to be valve train. And if you can get your valve train worked out, what's going to happen on these bigger motors is it's just going to make more power everywhere. It's going to make more power at the top, but it's also going to make more power as it gets to the top. So it's not necessary that you have the stroke length. It's just a smaller motor. But I do like the 4.8s, and I think that they're great, and you can make lots of power with them. It would not almost ever be my choice for a naturally aspirated thing. I plan on doing another naturally aspirated 4.8 buildup, not because that's what I would choose. I would pick a 6-liter. If you're going to do NA, maybe even make it bigger than that, make it 408 or something for an all motor thing. But on a 4.8, I just want to show that, yeah, we can take a 4.8 and we put the right heads, cam, and intake manifold on it, the stock short block. I want to show that we can make like a 500 horsepower one. Do I recommend guys doing that? No, not any more than I recommend guys building a 500 horsepower all motor 5.3. One, the expense of it, and two, do you want to have an RPM motor like that? Is that where you want to make power? Put gears in and all that is fine. But when you start going up in elevated power outputs on these motors, it just makes more sense to do it with boost because it's so much easier to do. And for an equal amount or even way less money with a turbo thing, you can just make 2 or 3 times that amount of power. And so, if you're going to spend the money, just get all the extra power for boost. It's, just a whole lot easier. So let's see what you guys got going on. Darren. Okay, if you want to make 500 horsepower NA, would you pick the high winding 4.8 over the 5.3 or 6.0? David, what's going on? Greetings, my drivability teacher knows of the great Richard Holder. Hopefully we can catch him in a live stream. I'm in drivability course and doing well. That's good. Are you when you're talking about drivability, are you doing drivability like tuning? Is that what you're doing? I have an 86 school bus project with a 5.7, a gasser. Okay, cool. Is it a 5.7 SB? Does that mean small block? So is it a 350 Chevy then that you're doing? Thanks for giving me my perspective. Our RHP 550 lift, 100 at 1.8, enough seat pressure for 100 longer, 11.30 seconds, old style valve. Secondly, will the locks and retainers fit 11.30 second stems? What is it you're putting? Are you talking about the springs? The LS retainers will not work with an 11.30 second stem. They're designed for an 8mm stem. The spring doesn't care as long as you locate the spring properly, but the retainer that you're going to have to use and the keeper you're going to have to use on 11.30 seconds valve are going to require a specific retainer and keeper setup that's not going to work from an LS, which is what we sell those springs, and then they're designed to use a stock retainer. And 100 at 50, 100 pounds of seat pressure at 50 is not going to be enough, depending on, I don't know what the diameter of that valve is, and the weight of the valve is the most important thing. Just installed a 4.8 with a BTR stage 3 truck cam, 3200 converter, Trailblazer SS, Holly engine 7.8, 373. You might have a tune issue, and also a stage 3 truck cam is bigger than I would use in a 4.8. Burned it up. I'm thinking about stroking the block and trying for 450 horsepower replacement and input. There. Brian, Silverado is a vehicle. Well, vehicle weight's a lot. But a 4.8 is going to be soft. 3200 converter should help it with that camshaft, but that cam is definitely going to be soft in a 4.8. Trailblazer SS is a good choice. Long tube headers are a good choice. A 4 series gear obviously would be better, which is what the tow packages and stuff came with, like mine. I'm assuming it's a 700R4 trans or a 4L60E. $275.40 45 and 100 up. It screams and pulls good. So next to put 456s. Yeah, the gearing will definitely help that. But that 4.8 with that sort of cam is going to be soft. My drivability is tuning, fuel trims, ignition timing. Okay, that's good. How do you feel about remote tuning over dyno tuning? And what is my thought between the two? I don't know why you would want to compare them. Remote tuning is fine as long as you can send logs back and forth and show the tuner what's happening and what needs to be fixed. I think being there is ideal. And I think driving, it's like street tuning works very well for drivability stuff. We don't do like on an engine dyno. An engine dyno is not tuning for drivability at all. In no way, shape, or form is that drivability. Chassis dyno, definitely you can do drivability. But I think the best thing is a combination of those. Is do your tuning on the chassis dyno. For wide open throttle is really easy. Transition's easy for that. Most of the drivability is good on a chassis dyno. And then what I think Ish and Eric would do is that they would then take it out on the street and drive it around and make sure it does all the things that they want it to do. And then it would be right. And then also one of the things that are also important that I saw those guys do a lot is they would let the car sit overnight and then do cold start and things like that, make sure that that's working properly. And whether that's done remotely or not has nothing to do with the tune. It has nothing to do with the ability of the tune. You guys still got to get the tune right. Truck Plus on a 6-liter. Do you have a tube or should we individually tune it? I don't know what you mean by tube. Do we have a tune? Up and coming project for me, 0648, 222 cam, heads milled 30, single plane, going in a light, sub 3000 RPM Nova bracket car. Okay. I like to see how that thing runs. You're gonna have to have a big converter in it and gears. And I just don't know if you're gonna like the single plane. I just built a 333. Do you think the Summit cam is comparable to a Truck Norris? Is the 8704 the one that I directly compared to the Truck Norris? Thinking of doing a simple refresh on my 4.8, maybe a Truck Norris cam, putting it in an 80 Cutlass. Okay. I'm at work typing. The LSA doesn't really tell me very much. The duration at 50 is the critical element for that camshaft. I don't remember specifically what the part number was on the Summit cam and the Cam Motion cam that when I compared all those different ones. If your goal was a usable, reachable 6-liter with good drivability, would you rather do a small single or a ported 112, 600 to 700 horsepower range, 6-speed auto BMW trans? A turbo is going to be way better than a 112 is. A 112 is going to be limited in, and to get 700 from a 112, you're going to have to really spin it. A turbo is just really simple. 456 is 20-inch tire, 4,000 plus converter. Okay. Let me see here on this. LS Cathedral Port. Okay, so RPM on this 4.8. We're going to look at this. Victor Jr. So at 4,000 RPM, 4,000 RPM, the difference is 34 foot-pounds between a single plane and a dual plane. They start getting closer after 5,000. And then they're pretty comparable from 5 to 7, let's say. Will one of your cams you sell be good for 4.8? Yes, although even those two cams, because you'd pick the Ripper cam or the Lowbuck truck camshaft. That's a 212. The Lowbuck truck camshaft is a 212 at 50. If I had an otherwise stock 4.8, I might pick even one that's smaller than those two. If you feel dual plane would be much better, I'm 100% willing to change the intake manifold. I'll blue collar, send me over an email and I'll forward you the dyno curve. You could take a look and see what you think. What kind of boost do you think I can get away with on a 4.8 with a 200,000 miles on it with a boatload of idle time, ProCharger D1SC? I mean, you could go into 4 digits with rain gap on a 4.8 without any problem at all. It'll do all of whatever that D1SC will put out. And it's the boost thing is not a relevant question. I mean, it's relevant. It's not an accurate question. You need to tell us more about it. You need to tell us what you're doing with it. Are you going to go to full throttle at maximum RPM, at maximum boost, and then just leave it there and just try to run all the way across the United States? Most people don't do that. How often are you going to go and boost? How long is it? What fuel are you using? Is it intercooled? You got a good cold air on it? Do you have the right cooling? The tune is going to be the critical thing. Are 706 heads best for street car or truck, especially on a 6-liter? No, I wouldn't say they're best. They're good for a particular thing. And then on a 6-liter, it's more of a choice than it is on a 4.8 or 5.3. On a 4.8 or 5.3, I would just use the heads that are on it, which is going to be an 862 or a 706 in 90% of the cases. There are some 5.3s that had 243 heads on it because they were flat top pistons, like an L33 and some of the later aluminum Gen 4 stuff. But on a 6-liter, you can do all of the different heads. So it depends on what you're trying to do. I don't know what you mean by just street. Are you just driving it around? Do you care more about power below 5,000 than you do above 5,000? Are you doing anything to the heads? Like you could just mill 317s I wouldn't pick. But a 799 head, if you just mill them, then you're good. Are you doing ported ones? Are you putting a cam in it? What other things are happening that would affect probably my choice? The 6-liter LS remote turbo running on the 85, no intercooler. Am I pushing by running 18 degrees of timing? My air temperature is around 140 during the run. I would always run an intercooler with a turbo, even on the 85, even on a remote. It wouldn't make any difference. Always try to run an intercooler, but you have to look and see, are you getting detonation? Because I don't know what the air temperature is going into the turbo. And how much boost is that? 140 air temperature going into the motor on a boosted application seems pretty low with no intercooler. So I don't know what temperature of the day is, but would be not unusual to add 100 degrees under boost, depending on what the boost level is. Yeah, 140 NA. You can do that on a closed hood. If you're drawing air from inside the engine compartment, it can easily be that hot. Even on an NA motor. On a turbo thing, like I said, you're between 7 and 10 pounds, you're going to add 100 degrees. It's going to be that much. It's going to be a lot. Let's see here. Unless it's a blow-through carbureted deal. Dulcich always likes cams with a 107 or 108 LSA. Then he advances the intake center line. Does that work for hot street trucks or heavy cars with the LS? I don't know. I really don't know what you mean by that question. I don't know when Dulcich would want a 107 or 108. I don't know what the other valve events are. I don't know what the duration is. I don't know what the application is. I don't know any of that stuff. Universal things for likes different LSAs. I don't know that Dulcich necessarily does that. And if he did, if he always picked, no matter what, if he picked a a 200 at 50 cam, and it's got to be a 107 or 108, a 210, a 220, a 230, a 240, 250. And he always does that. I would say that's probably not the case. And so maybe he picked that LSA for specific things that he was doing, working with other duration and stuff. But as a universal thing, we don't do that. LS likes 114, if that's what you're asking. Again, I would completely disagree with that. There's not a universal thing that this kind of motor likes this LSA. That's nonsense, because there's no way that one LSA, one specific LSA, works for one engine family for a stock motor that you're just driving around, and then a dedicated race motor that's running 8,500 RPM. That doesn't work universally for that whole bandwidth of different kinds of cam choices. There's all kinds of different things that will work, and different LSAs are going to be combined with different kinds of, different kinds of lift and different kinds of duration and different kinds of duration splits and effective RPM range. And there's a lot going on there with camshafts. Ronald, you're running 11 PSI. It should at least be 10 degree change per pound of boost on top of ambient. So whatever ambient starts out at, if you start out with an 80 degree day, you're adding 110 degrees. It should be, it's going to be up closer. And if you run it like multiple times in a row, it would not be unusual for it to be, closer to 200 degrees. Changing gears, literally a Fox body, 331, 400 horsepower. Do you think 373 gears are too steep for street use? No, I don't. I also think of switching to 350 or 327. No, I think 373s are going to be fun. Gen 4, 4.8, 243 heads, torque storm, 14 pounds. Had 399 at the tire, ran out of fuel, changed fuel pump and boost reference. Comp, 206, 212 cam. Any idea? At a Gen 4 4.8 with 243 heads, what intake manifold do you have? But 14 pounds, unless this is just on pump gas and you have no timing in it, pump gas and boost reference regulator, change fuel pump. Yeah, I don't know what fuel you have, but 14 pounds on a 4.8 should be way more than 300 or 400 horsepower at the tire. File test description. Okay, so just to give you an idea, we ran a 4.8. It had trick flow heads on it. It had a BTR stage 1 blower cam in it. Had headers on it. Had a carbureted intake manifold and a blow-through carburetor, and then had a a stage 1 cam, and then a VORTECH TI trim and an intercooler. So let's do the RPM. At 15.8 pounds, it made 800 horsepower at the flywheel. That's not on pump gas, though. Is there a perfect LSA for turbo applications? Old guy told me 114. No, there's absolutely not a perfect LSA for turbo applications. That's not a thing. If somebody told you that, he doesn't understand what's going on with the dynamic equation that is the internal combustion engine, and then they boosted internal combustion engine, and then a different camshaft. You shouldn't be thinking about it like that. What you should be thinking about is you should choose your cam for what you want the motor to do NA. How do you want the thing to idle? Do you want it to have good idle vacuum? Do you want to have good low speed power? Do you want to use it? You want to use it with a stock converter? What effective RPM range do you want the camshaft to put the engine into, working in conjunction with the intake manifold and the cylinder heads and stuff like that? And then what boost, well, if you're doing a turbo, then you just add a turbo to it. So we run turbos with cams that are 106 or 7 LSA and cams that are 122 LSA. The other things on the cams were different. and the effective where the thing is we were wanting it to make power and all that's different. We've also run boosts with every stock cam, wild range of different LSAs, durations and stuff, and then hundreds of aftermarket cams. Richard, our AFR 335 heads too much head for my 454 board, no more than 40 over versus a 290 head. You won't be able to take advantage of what an AFR 335 head does with your 454 unless you're running it to 7,500 or 8,000 and it's really, really high compression and has a dry sump and has a camshaft that's to high 270s, 280 at 50, that kind of thing. You don't need that head. A 290 is still way more cylinder head than you're ever going to use on your 454. What cam do you recommend for a stock Gen 453 NA 243 heads with upgraded springs and stock torque converter, Truck Norris, NSR, BTR V3 stage 1? I think I would get the new BTR. If you're going to get a BTR cam, I think I would get the new stage 2. Stock truck, intercooler, 93 octane headers, stock truck intake, intercooler, 93 octane, stock E38 computer with custom operating system from HV tuners. Not a lot of timing. Truck intake's good, intercooler's good, 93 octane. Yeah, you're just not going to be making very much. You're probably not going to have. You probably don't have very much timing in it. 290 is good for 454. I have 290s on a 496, 244 cam. .630 horsepower and 630 torque. It's weird that they would be the same. Let me go look and see what the... No, maybe it's 630. Maybe that's probably right. Okay, final AFR 290. Oh, that's a lot. But even at that made 720. 730 actually. It only made 638 foot-pounds. 630 seems like a lot on the torque number. Yeah, that the torque number seems high to me for some reason. Corner 315 AFRs for more RPM potential. Okay, should I pick a different cam for nitrous versus boost, or will one cam work for both? You can, as I said, you should pick the camshaft for what you want the camshaft to do NA. Same thing with nitrous. For if I was doing a nitrous motor, I would pick a different cam than I would be for a turbo, mostly because when you're adding nitrous to whatever the NA power output is. So if you're at 100 shot, and you add 100 shot to a 300 horsepower motor, you get 400. But if you add the 100 shot to a 400 horsepower motor, now you get 500. So most guys that are running nitrous, they don't want to take a 400 horsepower motor or a 300 horsepower motor and add 500 horsepower with nitrous, because you can't do that. It gets really, really hard to do that. So I would pick a different cam, not because I think nitrous itself needs a different cam necessarily, and especially for any sort of street application. Nitrous works with all of the cams. It worked with every stock cam I've ever tested with. It's worked with every aftermarket cam I've ever tested with. It just adds to whatever is there. But I would pick a different one only because I would want a different starting point. Got the dyno sheets. That's all fine. I'm not saying it doesn't do that. I'm just saying 630 foot-pounds is a lot for something that only makes 630 horsepower. The low buck truck cam works with my stock converter, but I am positive when I give her the beans, it's slipping a little bit. No stranger to abusing the 4T65E. Your converter is slipping? Built a turbo, but it's not performing the way I thought it would. What can you deduce from this arrangement? A 98, 140, 96, 88 divided T6. What is it you're asking it to do? What is it you want it to do, and what is it not doing? And what is the NA power output? A 98 140 is a pretty big turbo. Seems to take way longer to spin up than I thought it would. A billet wheel, ball bearing. The billet wheel and the ball bearing make no difference. Basically starts producing boost when I run out of RPM. Well, what is the desired power output, and what are you trying to do? What is the NA power output? Do you have a 500 horsepower 496? Do you have a 600 horsepower 496? And then how much power are you trying to make? A 98 140 is a gigantic turbo. So how much? Let's let's go in reverse. Tell me your combination, NA combination. If you have dyno tested and you have dyno results, that would be great. Otherwise, tell me how much power you want to make. Right now, the motor by itself makes 550 crank horsepower on 93 at 6100. Okay, is it a 10-to-1 motor or something? Seems like it's got some kind of cylinder heads on it and a decent sized camshaft. She ran the 331 small block Ford on engine dyno. It may have gone a little small on the cam. It's got lots of torque. That's good. 360 foot-pounds at 3,000, peaking at 400 at 4,200. Peak horsepower comes in a little sooner than I thought. 350 horsepower at 5,300. Pull 17 inches of vacuum at what, Mike? What intake manifold is on this, and what camshaft and heads are on this? I can't remember. Sounds like the perfect setup for a centrifugal blower. 5 to 8 psi in the future. Does adding intercooler make the turbo spool up sooner? Yes, it definitely can. And adding ice water makes it spool up sooner, even more sooner. Okay, 218, 224. And then is it a dual plane intake manifold, I'm assuming, then, with that sort of horsepower peak? And then I'm assuming headers on that thing too. Shooting for 800, 1100 wheel horsepower through a manual. Yeah, you got way crossfire. You have way more turbo than you need. And then tell me about the rest of the motor. So you should put one of our G42s on that. On 496, it would spool immediately. It would have all the spool that you need. Everyday driver, spirited driving. Take 92. BTR stage 1 cam, short headers, stock exhaust, stock pro charger intercooler, 850 injectors, good fuel. Okay. Mr. Chippo. So we're back to see if there was something else there, but I don't see anything else there. Air gap 650 vacuum secondary. Are you sure that the one thing I would check is, did you make sure that the vacuum secondary is opening all the way? You still like junkyard motors for low buck trucks? Yes, very much. Which motor you search for the yards? LS Windsor, small buck Chevy. I search for all of those at different times when I'm testing different versions of all of those motors. So yeah, I do like, I love the junkyard for anything that I'm going to. I go get it from the junkyard 90% of the time. Think about Charles' pinwheel and spinning and compressor. Engine 3/4 dyno headers. Okay, you did have dyno heads on. Boost level 2,000 miles. What is your question about boost level? All of our junkyard big bang motors, even the ones that made 1,500 plus horsepower, They all had more than 200,000 miles on them. We took them apart, added a ring gap, used all of the junkyard stuff, stock heads, well, not the heads, but all of the bottom end stuff. So stock block that originally came from the wrecking yard and all the things that came in that block. The original pistons, rods, crank, bearings, rings, we just put extra ring gap in them and then put it back together. So you don't have to worry about the miles. It's fine. Crossfire 9.5 to 1 makes 2 pounds of boost at 5,000, gains like 3 psi by red line. I thought I was choking out with a 1-to-1 housing, so I went to 132. There's been almost no change. Yeah, you're not choking it out. The reverse is what's happening of that. You either have I would check the wastegates maybe. You either have a boost leak or the turbo is just way too big for what you're doing. You don't need a 9.5 to 1 compression. Again, I don't know what the cam is or what RPM range, that kind of stuff. I went back and thought they might be, they wouldn't let me in the room, but I had them confirm it for what it's worth. Okay. Yeah, because we get that happening. That's very, very common on an engine dyno. Having the secondaries not open, and unless you have a guy that's been dyno testing a while and has checked that and cares about that, it's like at WestTech, it's like 100% of the time. We usually have to wire them open on the dyno to make them work. Just wire it so that they both open manually. Blow racing, high lift cam duration longer than 250, but I lost cam card. Okay, 250 is enough on a big block, or more than 250 on a 496. What's a fair price for a junkyard engine? Junkyard engines vary all over the board, depending on what the location is and what they service, and you know, it could be anywhere from $300 or $400 to $3,000 or $4,000, depending on where you're at and you know what they're offering. The only reason I rebuilt my daily 5.3 was only because the spring tension on the chain broke. I was in the pickup tube. Yeah, that's not good. Spirited driving, like when someone thinks they have junk and blow their doors off. Yeah, what you can do is you can, if you just take a stock junkyard LS, put cam springs, injectors, put a pump in it, put a turbo on it, you'll have lots of fun. You'll be able to smoke the tires. I'll do more testing once it's in the CARB, but should pull pretty hard. I think I was pretty old school and usually runs bigger drag boat engines. Okay. Yeah, vacuum secondary cars. I mean, vacuum secondary carbs tend to work really well on the street. I like them. I've used them a lot. On the engine dyno, for some reason, they just don't seem to work quite as well. And we tried putting the lightest springs in them and all that, and it just, I don't know, it just seems to be problematic. In the same way that doing the wastegates on the engine dyno too. Maybe because the acceleration rate that we've chosen, maybe because the artificial load on the load in, I don't know, but it just, you know, that's why we do what we do. That's why I put 2 wastegates in there to make sure that we have control over that. And it's fun just running the signal to one of them and not to the other, and running it to the top of one wastegate and to the bottom of the other, and playing with that and just seeing how all of that affects how it affects what's going on with when the wastegate's opening. So I think the compressor wheel is too large and the engine can't turn it. That's about the only thing I come up with. I think that the hot side and the cold side, I think that entire turbo is way too big for what you're doing. Take a look, go on to richardholdnerperformance.com and take a look at the specs on our G42 turbo. That's a 1200 horsepower turbo. And look at the specs on that compared to the one that you have. And you can see what I'm talking about. And then go on to Garrett's website or on BorgWarner's website and look at comparable wheel sizes to what you have, and then look at the power ranges for those. I follow you and saw you on Steve Morse the other day. Yeah, going out and hanging out with Steve was cool. I mean, they make big power over there. You still have your old Dodge van? I do not have the Dodge van anymore. I did sell that. That was quite a while ago, though. But I do have a 360 that but it's a Magnum that we're going to be doing a bunch of stuff with. Just a ring gap for longevity under boost. Brake specific fuel consumption look really good in the 3.5 to 4 range. Okay. That seems really low that seems really efficient. I mean, let's see here. Yeah, that's just going to be a function of air fuel. I was told after I built this that you should never run a compressor wheel larger than the turbine wheel. But I've run like PTE 67s, 62s before with good results. Yeah, that's not an accurate thing also. We've run T3, T4 turbos on import stuff back in the day for forever. And so the compressor wheel was larger than the turbine wheel because the motor was small enough where that wasn't an issue. At your power level, you're probably not going to have that. Send an email the specs I need to run. Yeah, what was it, brake specific? Oh, this was a boosted one. That's why we're looking at that. I think the brake specific was in the 5s, actually in the 6s at the beginning, but that's not unusual. Wow, we ran that like at 12.4. That was a blow through carbureted deal. Near. We ran a lot of back in the day on the Honda stuff and other imports. We'd run T3s, but then once we started making power, we'd run T3 hot sides and T4 cold sides because we were asking the thing to make, a lot of power and then also be kind of responsive. And if you could get those two working right, it worked fairly well. And it's not unusual to have a smaller hot side and a bigger cold side on a twin application. That's not unusual because you're only using half of the motor to drive it. And the bigger the motor is at a given power level, you'd be more likely to stagger the hot side. So if you wanted to make 1,000 horsepower on a 408, you could use a different turbo with more hot side flow than if you wanted to do that on a 4.8 or a 5.3. In fact, that's one of the reasons that the turbos that we have, like the 3584 or the G35 or the G42, they would be rated at the power levels that they're rated at. But like the 3584 is rated at 900 horsepower, a little over 900 horsepower. But it won't do that on an LS because you run out of hot side flow. So if you made the hot side bigger, then you could get more flow from the cold side of that turbo. And the way that you do that is you don't change the hot side flow. What you do is you change the motor that you're testing it on. You don't do it on a V8. You do it on an inline 6-cylinder that needs more pressure ratio and has less back pressure. Or a K-Series Honda is another good example of where you can do that. What about the Chrysler 2.2 turbo stuff? I've been driving my Omni around. If you wanted to make a 500 horsepower NA, would you pick the high winding 4.8 or a 5.3 or 6.0? 79% are saying no, I would not do that. Thanks for the advice. I've been trying to figure this out for a month. With all the changes I've made, I cannot get it to perform like I expected. How big is the exhaust on that? The closest turbo I can find is a GT55. And a GT55 is a gigantic turbo. It's way bigger than you would need for what you're doing. That's why it's laggy. Look at the power output that a GT55 would support. Like I said, for 1200 horsepower, you need like an S480 kind of thing, that sort of frame style or size. It could be a T6, but there's also T4 versions of those, or V-band versions. Our G42 turbo will get you 1,000 at the tire, I'm sure, on a 496. Yeah, it might. I don't know. It might be hot side limited there on a 496. But it would be a lot more responsive than the turbo that you have. Got 2 more minutes. 2 minutes. Could a guy put a small turbo on an old big block such as a 440, 455, or 500 if you only do 5 psi without ring gap? The ring gap and the boost are not directly related. What is related is, what is the ring gap now? Is it really tight? Is it loose? Is it somewhere in the middle? And then how much temperature are you putting? Because the ring gap growth is a direct result of ring temperature. So boost and ring temperature are related, but 5 pounds of boost doesn't make it grow this much, and then 8 pounds makes it grow this much, and 10 pounds makes it grow this much. That's not how that works. 5 pounds for a long period of time, it can make the ring gap grow enough to where it's problematic. So the answer to your question is, yeah, you can run 5 pounds from a turbo on any of those motors. How long can you do it for? And without knowing the ring gap, you're just taking a chance. Might be a bit off topic tonight, but I'll ask anyway. Heard you say before you would not recommend a sloppy stage 2 cam for a daily driver. Why is that? I would not recommend that certainly on a 4.8, because I think that cam's too big for a daily driver. That camshaft's a 228 cam, and so that's bigger than I would recommend for most daily drivers. It is a single pattern or near a single pattern cam, so it's a little better than a 228 240 kind of camshaft, because it's a 228 230. I just think, for my taste, that it's bigger than I would want. When do you think piston speed would affect the life of rings or rods, or any other effect for an endurance road course engine? I don't know how to answer that, because all of the things that I'm doing, I'm not building professional road race motors, and then I've never done any endurance cycling tests to find out what effect the piston speed is. I don't think that that's a thing. I think you'd be really hard pressed to measure, like, oh, a 4.8 is better for road racing than a 5.3 is because of the piston speed. Being able to determine whether or not that had an effect on the ring, even to begin with, whether it had any effect at all, would be an OEM level or the highest level of professional road racing might be able to tell you that. Otherwise, it's not a thing that we would even consider in the things that I'm doing, because the things that I'm doing are junkyard motors that already have 200 or 250,000 miles on them. So how are we going to tell whether or not it had any effect? We just don't know. I don't know that piston speed and ring life are going to be a consideration. Usually other things are more important than that. I'm running a sloppy stage 2 on my turbo 6-liter. I wish I had a smaller cam. Yeah, I wouldn't pick, like, I know that Matt is really big on that cam, and that cam works good for making power, but it makes power, at a higher RPM range. I don't think it has a great idle. It's not a cam I'd ever put in any 4.8, unless I was, because if I was doing a 4.8 where I want to make lots of power, that's not the cam that I would pick. There's lots better and more powerful cams than that for higher RPM stuff. And so it's a cam that's kind of in the middle there. I think most people bought it because it's inexpensive. And yes, it will make power, but would not be my choice. I think there's lots better cams. The turbo originally was an S480. I machined it out to be a ball bearing and threw in the stock size 9688 wheel and the T6 housing using or off diesel semis. Yeah, a diesel semi is not where you want to get a turbo from. The most bizarre thing was that changing the air ratio did not improve the spool up. I expected it to be at least choke out on the top end, but improved it will not choke out on the top end. Changing an AR, even the most amount that you could change it, is not going to do that. You have to change the turbo size for something like that to happen. An AR change is going to be a minor trimming kind of thing. Thankful for all the information. Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to everybody. I might be on tomorrow too. We'll see. Just worry about putting a window in the block after running 6,000 to 9,000 for extended periods. You have way more issues in any kind of 9,000 RPM motor. You have way more issues than ring life versus piston speed. You have tuning issues, you have oiling issues, you have spring and valve train issues. You have things that are going to be way, way higher on that list. Yeah, Crossfire, I think you just have the wrong turbo in there. You need a smaller turbo. You don't need to be worried about choking it out. You need to be worried about spooling it up. Get it spooled, get it working, and make lots of power. You could also put 2 of our 3584s on there. That would be good on that. I will trade you my brand new sloppy stage 2 for one of your low buck trucks. We have. I think I have a sloppy stage 2 still. In fact, I think I have a bunch of those. I think I have 1s and 1.5s and 2s and 3s. Cavitation with a stock oil pump for what? Yeah, that's definitely a thing. Oiling issues are very, very common, and particularly in road race cars and endurance cars. Oiling is a critical thing. So having the right, not just the right pump, usually that's the dry sump stuff. Having the right, like a dry sump is excellent. Having the right windage tray on a dry sump, all of that stuff is kind of compartmentalized and taken care of. So it works really good. But making sure that you always have oil flow and oil pressure and lubrication to all of the important spinning parts. It's very, very important, because wet sump stuff for road racing is just it's hard to get any sort of good system that way. What's my daily driver? My daily driver is a bone stock other than a muffler 02 Chevy Silverado. And it's not fun. But the Dodge Omni, the Turbo Omni that I have that I drive every once in a while, is a lot of fun, because it's all been redone. It's all stock. It's a T2 swap setup, which I really like. We just put a boost gauge and stuff in it. And so I like that, and it's really cool. And so shout out to the guys at the Car Farm, Ben and Brian, for making that a reality. The car looks fantastic. It's all painted and stuff. And so I really like that. But that's not a daily. %90 of people happier with a smaller turbo and a smaller camshaft than a bigger turbo, a bigger camshaft. That's the way it works. I will see you guys all later. Happy Thanksgiving. If I don't see you before Thanksgiving, but I'm pretty sure I will. There.